In the quiet that settled after Maplewood's storm, the Carter family discovered something larger than justice, something that reached beyond verdicts and beyond the walls of a courtroom. Olivia, once crushed beneath grief, found laughter again in the clumsy steps of shadow. Jack, a soldier who had faced countless battles, finally learned that the hardest war was not fought with weapons, but with love, patience, and faith. And as the sun rose over the town, its amber light carried a reminder that even in the darkest valleys, a dawn still waits. Perhaps it was more than chance. Perhaps the truth surfacing after so much silence was a whisper of grace, a sign that loyalty and love are never wasted. Some would call it resilience, others justice. But those who believe know, it was also a miracle, the kind of quiet miracle that God plants in broken places, turning sorrow into strength. Ranger's loyalty did not end in his death. It lived on in Olivia's courage and in the bond that tied a wounded family together. This story is not only about one town or one family, it belongs to us all. How many of us carry scars that no one sees, battles fought in silence, moments when lies seemed louder than truth? And yet, just as Maplewood saw the dawn, our lives too hold the promise of renewal if we cling to love, stand for truth, and never surrender hope. As you finish this journey with us, I invite you to reflect. Where have you seen such miracles in your own life? Share your thoughts in the comments. We would be honored to hear your story. If you believe loyalty still saves lives, subscribe and join our growing family. And if your heart is ready, write Amen as a prayer for Olivia, for Ranger's memory, and for every soul fighting silent battles today. May God bless you. May He keep your families safe. And may His light guide you through the shadows into your own new dawn. Maplewood, Vermont, basked in the mellow glow of late autumn, the streets littered with crisp golden leaves that swirled gently in the cool breeze. On a quiet neighborhood block, where tidy colonial houses stood shoulder to shoulder and the scent of wood smoke drifted from chimneys, 12-year-old Olivia Carter walked slowly down the sidewalk, her small hands clutching a worn leather leash. At the other end trotted her German shepherd, Ranger, his silver-tipped black coat gleaming in the low afternoon sun, ears erect and alert. Ranger was 7 years old, a sturdy male with powerful legs, a noble head, and intelligent amber eyes that often seemed to read Olivia's moods before she even spoke. He had once been trained as a service animal for military veterans, but after failing the program for being too gentle, he had been placed with the Carters. For Olivia, he was more than a pet. He was her lifeline after the terrible months that had followed her mother's death from cancer. Olivia was small for her age, her narrow shoulders hidden beneath a faded navy hoodie printed with the NASA logo. Her chestnut hair, usually tied in a loose braid, slipped out in strands that brushed against her pale cheeks, cheeks that had once glowed with laughter, but now carried the faint hollows of grief. Her dark brown eyes, eyes that mirrored her late mother's, had dimmed since the funeral. Olivia had been a lively girl, always curious, filling notebooks with sketches of constellations she dreamed of one day mapping as an astronomer. But loss had stolen that brightness. Ranger was the only presence that coaxed her out of silence, the one creature who anchored her to routine. As they walked, Olivia's thoughts swirled. Today marked nearly a year since the chemo had failed, nearly a year since she had watched her father, Jack, crumble beside the hospital bed. She tried not to think about it, but grief had a way of lingering in every breath. The sidewalks of Maplewood were quiet, though occasionally the sound of children playing in backyards or the whir of passing cars reminded Olivia that life for others moved on. She tugged Ranger's leash gently, whispering, "Heel, boy." He obeyed instantly, his muscular frame shifting to stay perfectly aligned at her side. She felt comfort in that disciplined movement, the reassurance that he was not just strong, but trustworthy, her silent guardian. As they rounded a corner, the rhythm of their walk was disrupted by the slow approach of a white police cruiser. Its tires crackled against fallen leaves, its windows reflecting the fading sunlight. Olivia stiffened, remembering her father's lessons about awareness. Never ignore a patrol car that lingers too long. She tried to look casual, but her small hand gripped Ranger's leash tighter. The cruiser eased forward, then rolled to a stop a few yards ahead. Two men stepped out. The first was Officer Mark Daniels, a man in his late 30s with a thick neck, a square jaw covered in the shadow of stubble, and pale blue eyes that flickered with suspicion more than warmth. His sandy blonde hair was cropped close, a military cut that spoke of rigid control. Years on the force had hardened him, but those years also carried whispers of complaints, citizens who had accused him of excessive force, though nothing had ever stuck. Daniels walked with the cocky ease of someone who believed his badge was both weapon and shield. The second was Officer Paul Grant, older, perhaps mid-40s, with a heavier build and thinning brown hair slicked back from a wide forehead. His brown eyes seemed colder, calculating, and though his mouth often bent into a polite smile, it was the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. Grant had a reputation for meticulous reports, for covering every angle to protect himself and his partners. Some said he was cautious, others said he was cunning. "Afternoon," Daniels said, his voice casual but sharp, like a blade wrapped in velvet. His eyes ran over Olivia and then fixed on Ranger. "That's a big dog for a little girl." Olivia swallowed, her heart hammering. "He's trained, sir. Ranger won't cause trouble." Her voice was soft but steady, just as her father had taught her when speaking to authority. Grant stepped closer, hands resting near his duty belt. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area. Anyone hanging around you've noticed?" Olivia shook her head. "No, sir. Just walking my dog." Ranger, sensing her unease, shifted slightly forward, placing his body between Olivia and the officers. It was a protective stance, not aggressive. Ears pricked, eyes alert, tail low but steady. Daniels's lips tightened. "Control your animal," he snapped, though Ranger hadn't moved beyond that subtle shift. "He is controlled," Olivia said, her fingers tightening on the leash, her heart racing now. She felt the weight of their stares, the disbelief that lingered in their eyes. What happened next blurred into chaos. Daniels took a step forward, his hand brushing against his holster. Grant muttered something too low for Olivia to hear. Ranger, ever vigilant, mirrored Olivia's retreating step, his muscles taut. To Olivia, it was nothing unusual. He had done the same countless times when she grew nervous. But to the officers, or at least to Daniels, it became something else entirely. "He's attacking!" Daniels shouted, in one terrifying, irreversible motion. His service weapon cleared its holster, the barrel rising, the trigger squeezing. The gunshot cracked through the peaceful Maplewood afternoon, shattering the quiet like glass under a hammer. Birds scattered from nearby trees, children's laughter from distant yards fell silent, and Olivia screamed. Ranger yelped, a sound raw and agonizing, then collapsed onto the pavement. Crimson blossomed across his silver-tipped coat, spreading quickly. Olivia dropped to her knees, her small hands pressing desperately against the wound, tears streaking her cheeks. "Ranger, no, please stay with me." Her sobs filled the air, merging with the acrid scent of gunpowder. Grant stood back, his face expressionless, while Daniels holstered his weapon, his voice flat. The dog was aggressive. His words cut through Olivia's grief like ice. Across the street, a curtain twitched. On her porch, Mrs. Helen Whitman, an 82-year-old widow with silver hair pinned neatly back and sharp eyes that had seen decades of Maplewood's history, clutched her phone with trembling hands. She had been watching the girl pass with her dog every afternoon since summer. To her, Ranger had always been a gentle creature, trotting with a regal patience beside the lonely child. Now she dialed 911, her voice steady despite the tremor in her fingers. "I saw it all," she whispered fiercely into the phone. "The dog wasn't attacking. They shot it for nothing." Meanwhile, Olivia cradled Ranger's head in her lap, feeling the life ebbing from his body. His amber eyes sought hers, confusion and pain swirling within them, as if apologizing for leaving her behind. She sobbed harder, her body shaking, the world narrowing into the circle of blood and fur before her. Around them, neighbors emerged from their homes, drawn by the sound. Some gasped at the sight, but others, misled by Daniels's words, murmured that perhaps the dog had been dangerous after all. Olivia's heart fractured under the weight of their whispers. Her grief was no longer just for Ranger, but for the truth she felt slipping away, drowned out by lies and misunderstanding. She wanted to scream, to tell them that Ranger had never once bared his teeth at anyone, that he had been her protector, her best friend, her only comfort. Instead, her sobs choked her voice, leaving her powerless. Grant placed a hand on Daniels's arm, his tone low. "We'll need to file this quick." Say it lunged. Daniels nodded, his face hardening into the mask of justification. But Olivia heard them. Her small fists clenched, smearing blood across her hoodie, her tear-streaked face lifting with a fury she did not know she had. "He wasn't attacking! You scared him! You killed him!" Her words rang out, trembling but fierce. Daniels looked down at her, unmoved. "Step away from the animal, kid." She refused, pressing closer to Ranger, whispering broken pleas as his breathing grew ragged. A final thump of his tail against the pavement, weak but deliberate, was his last attempt to comfort her. Then stillness. His chest no longer rose. His amber eyes dimmed. Olivia froze, disbelief hollowing her chest. "No," she whispered. "He's dead." Her tears blurred everything, but she felt the weight of eyes on her. Neighbors, officers, strangers, all misunderstanding what had happened. She looked up, her gaze locking onto Daniels. Her voice shook with both grief and promise. "My father will make you pay." For the first time, Daniel's mask cracked, a flicker of unease crossing his face. Grant, however, smirked faintly, already calculating. Around them, the whispers grew louder, suspicion mixing with sympathy, the town caught in confusion. And then, in the heavy silence that followed, a distant siren wailed, drawing closer. Olivia clutched Ranger's still body, her heart thundering, her world shattered, her future uncertain. What she did not know yet was that this single gunshot, this one afternoon, would ignite a storm far greater than anyone in Maplewood could imagine. Rain clouds had begun to gather over Maplewood the following morning, dulling the golden autumn glow with streaks of gray as the Carter household sat shrouded in silence. Olivia Carter had not spoken since she was led home by a neighbor after the shooting. She had been trembling, her hoodie still stained with Ranger's blood, her small hands clasped tightly against her chest, as though she could hold on to the memory of the dog by sheer force of will. Her face, once round and alive with laughter, was drained now, lips pale, eyes swollen from hours of weeping. She sat on the couch, unmoving, staring blankly at the empty corner where Ranger's bed used to be, as if she could still hear the rustle of his breathing. The doorbell had rung once, then twice before she reacted, flinching like a bird startled from its perch. It was Aunt Amanda who opened the door, her tall, slender frame rigid with both fury and exhaustion. At 35, Amanda Lewis had sharp cheekbones, a long cascade of dark brown hair pinned back in a knot, and eyes that glinted with the kind of intelligence honed in years of courtrooms. She was Olivia's guardian during her brother Jack's deployments, a civil rights attorney known for her fiery cross-examinations and relentless pursuit of justice. But today her face betrayed cracks in that polished armor, deep lines etched across her brow, the strain of holding herself together for the child who had lost too much already. Amanda had been the one to call Jack overseas, her voice controlled but heavy, carrying across encrypted channels that his daughter's only comfort had been gunned down. On the other end of that call, thousands of miles away, Jack Carter listened in silence. Jack Carter was a man marked by wars most Americans would never hear about, a decorated Delta Force commander who had spent 2 decades navigating shadows in deserts and jungles alike. At 38, his body remained sculpted from years of disciplined training, 6'2", broad-shouldered, his posture always balanced as if braced for sudden impact. His face was angular, the jaw strong but perpetually tight, his dark hair cut short with threads of gray sneaking in at the temples, and eyes so deep-set and stormy they seemed to carry every mission's ghost with them. Widowhood had aged him beyond his years. Eleanor's death 2 years prior had carved sorrow into the lines around his mouth, softening only when he looked at Olivia. He had learned long ago to compartmentalize emotions, essential in combat, fatal in fatherhood. But the moment Amanda's words reached him, something broke loose inside. He boarded the first transport flight back, his military contacts pushing through red tape, his mind consumed by fragments of memory. Olivia's laughter as she brushed Ranger's coat, the sound of Eleanor's voice urging him to keep their daughter safe, and the gnawing thought that he had failed at the one thing that mattered most. On the journey home, surrounded by the hum of engines and the distant chatter of soldiers, Jack rehearsed what he might say to his daughter. Yet every phrase dissolved before it formed, because how did you tell a 12-year-old child that the world was cruel but she had to survive it anyway? When he finally entered the Maplewood house, Olivia didn't run to him as she once had after each deployment. She remained frozen on the couch, staring through him. Jack knelt in front of her, his large hands hovering uncertainly before brushing a strand of hair from her hollow cheek. "Liv," he whispered, his voice steady but fraying at the edges. "I'm here now." Her lips quivered, but no words came. Instead, her eyes filled again, spilling tears she seemed too exhausted to wipe away. Jack pulled her into his chest, and for the first time since Ranger's death, she clung to something, her small fingers gripping his shirt as if anchoring herself. Inside, Jack felt the rage coil, cold and methodical, the same way it had before missions. He had always fought enemies he could see. This time, the enemy wore badges and uniforms meant to protect. Meanwhile, at Maplewood Middle School, whispers traveled faster than autumn winds. Children repeated what their parents had overheard, that Olivia's German Shepherd had been dangerous, that the cops wouldn't shoot for no reason. By the time she returned to class, heads turned, eyes narrowed, and the phrase, "the girl with the killer dog," followed her in hushed tones. Among those who noticed was Ethan Moore, the school's science teacher. Ethan was in his mid-40s, tall but slightly stooped, with a build that suggested he had once been athletic, but had since surrendered to long hours at desks and labs. His thinning chestnut hair framed a face lined with both kindness and melancholy, and behind his square-framed glasses, his hazel eyes carried a quiet sadness. Years earlier, Ethan had lost his wife in a car accident, an event that had left him with a gentleness toward children who grieved, and an anger toward systems that failed them. He had been outside the schoolyard when the gunshot echoed through Maplewood. He had seen enough to know Ranger had not attacked. Yet when the police visited his home later that night, their warning had been clear. Don't get involved. Don't contradict the report. The threat was unspoken but unmistakable, and Ethan, still carrying the weight of his own loss, had chosen silence. That silence haunted him. Now, watching Olivia sitting alone at her desk, shoulders hunched, notebook unopened, Ethan felt the weight of his cowardice pressed down. He knew the cost of speaking out against officers in a small town, knew how colleagues could turn, how careers could vanish. Yet he also knew that if he stayed quiet, he was abandoning a child who had already lost too much. His hands shook as he adjusted his glasses, his heart pounding with indecision. Olivia herself drifted through the day like a ghost. She felt the sting of whispers, the sideways glances, the space classmates created around her as if grief were contagious. Each murmur pressed deeper into her chest, layering shame atop sorrow. At lunch, she sat alone, the seat across from her glaringly empty, where Ranger used to rest his head beneath the table at home. She scribbled absent-mindedly in her notebook, tiny constellations drawn and redrawn, trying to remind herself there was still something vast and beautiful beyond Maplewood, even if her world had collapsed. That evening, Jack stood at the kitchen window, staring into the dark yard where Ranger once bounded joyfully. Amanda leaned against the counter, arms folded, her sharp suit exchanged for sweatpants, though her expression remained sharp as glass. "You know they'll bury this," she said flatly. "Daniels and Grant, the department, the mayor. It'll be written off as justified force. End of story." Jack's jaw clenched. "Not if I can help it." Amanda's eyes softened briefly. "Don't let your training drive you down a path that costs Olivia more than she's already lost." But Jack only turned back to the window, his reflection a silhouette of a soldier who had lost both wife and dog, and now risked losing his daughter to fear. Inside him, resolve was forming, a resolve that blurred the line between justice and vengeance. And across town, in his modest one-bedroom apartment stacked with books and papers, Ethan Moore sat at his desk, staring at the phone. His conscience gnawed. He knew the truth could help the Carters, yet the shadow of the officer's threats lingered. He pictured Olivia's hollow stare, her quiet suffering, and wondered whether his silence made him complicit. Reaching for the receiver, his hand trembled. He dialed half the number to Amanda's office, then stopped, sweat dampening his brow. What if speaking up destroyed not just his career, but his safety? As thunder rolled over Maplewood, Olivia lay awake in her bed, hugging Ranger's worn collar to her chest. Each flash of lightning lit the empty corner where his bed once lay, and each rumble echoed the gunshot that still rang in her ears. She whispered into the darkness, "Why do they all think he was bad?" The silence answered her, heavy and unyielding. Downstairs, Jack scrolled through files Amanda had managed to pull. Complaints against Daniels, whispers about Grant, but all dismissed, all erased. He closed the laptop with a snap, exhaling sharply. "They think we'll be silent," he muttered. And in another part of town, Ethan finally pressed call. But when the line rang once, then twice, he slammed the phone down, heart racing. He turned off the lamp, sat in the darkness, and told himself he had time to decide. Yet deep down, he knew time was running out. The storm outside battered Maplewood through the night, but inside 3 homes, Olivia's, Amanda's, Ethan's, the weight of silence grew heavier. What none of them realized yet was that silence itself would soon become the most dangerous shadow of all. Maplewood's autumn skies stretched pale and brittle, streaked with the lingering smoke of chimneys, the air crisp but not yet winter's bite. Inside the Carter home, the warmth of the fireplace did nothing to ease the growing coldness in Jack Carter's chest. For nights he had sat awake, reviewing files Amanda had acquired through legal contacts, searching for threads that might unravel the officer's account. His jaw was locked in its habitual grim line, his broad shoulders hunched forward as if carrying the weight of an invisible pack. A soldier by training, Jack was used to hostile terrain. But this, navigating a system designed to bury truth, felt like a battlefield more treacherous than any desert raid. Each document he read bled the same conclusion. Officer Mark Daniels and Officer Paul Grant were not strangers to controversy. Daniels, with his pale blue eyes and clipped hair, had a record peppered with citizen complaints, excessive force, verbal aggression, intimidation. Grant, heavier and slower in gait but sharp and cunning, had accumulated similar reports, accusations of profiling, coercion, abuse of authority. Yet across 6 years, not one incident had resulted in formal discipline. Jack could almost feel the ink of bureaucracy smothering truth, a system that polished their armor while shielding them from consequence. He recognized the pattern. Protect your own, close ranks, silence dissent. It was the same code of brotherhood he had once depended upon in combat, twisted here into something rotten. In the corner of the room sat Olivia Carter, her small frame dwarfed by the armchair, her dark eyes hollow. She turned Ranger's worn collar over and over in her hands, thumb brushing the tag as if it were sacred. Jack's heart ached each time he looked at her, but he dared not show weakness. Instead, he told himself his fury would serve as shield and sword, though inside he feared the fight was already lost. Amanda Lewis, Jack's younger sister, entered with her usual precision, her tall form commanding even in casual clothes. She carried her laptop under one arm, her long hair pulled back, and the tightness in her jaw made her appear even sharper. "They've filed their official report," she said flatly, setting the computer on the table. Jack rose, towering beside her. "And?" Amanda's eyes met his, steady but dark. "It says Ranger lunged. Daniels fired in self-defense. Case closed." The words struck like a blow. Jack's hands clenched, veins pressing against the skin of his forearms. "Lunged?" His voice was low, incredulous. "He never lunged. Ranger was trained. He was a service dog for Olivia." Amanda exhaled, her shoulders sagging. "I know, but that's not what the public will see." She opened her laptop, showing a grainy video clip. One of the neighbors recorded from their porch. On the screen, Olivia appeared, holding Ranger's leash. The dog shifted forward half a step, placing himself between her and the officers. It was the stance Jack recognized instantly, protective, calm, controlled. Yet in the two-dimensional blur of the video, the movement looked sharp, abrupt, like the prelude to an attack. Daniels's shout followed, then the crack of gunfire. The recording ended. Jack stared at the frozen frame, his reflection in the screen merging with the image of his daughter clutching the leash. His chest tightened. "It's a lie told in pixels," he muttered. "But people will believe what they want to believe." Amanda's lips pressed into a thin line. "Already circulating. Social media posts say Olivia's dog was dangerous. Parents whisper at school. By tomorrow, she'll be branded." From the armchair, Olivia's voice finally broke through, soft and trembling. "Everyone at school already thinks so. They say Ranger was a killer." Her eyes filled with tears, but she refused to let them fall, her thin fingers gripping the collar tighter. "But he wasn't, Daddy. He was good. He was the only one who listened." Jack knelt beside her, his large hands cupping her small ones. His deep-set eyes softened, though the rage beneath remained. "I know, Liv. Ranger wasn't dangerous. He was the best part of us. But lies travel faster than truth." Olivia leaned into him, and for a moment he felt her fragile weight against his chest. He remembered Eleanor, his late wife, and the promise he had made at her grave, that he would protect Olivia from harm. Now he felt that promise splintering. Across town, in his dim apartment cluttered with textbooks, Ethan Moore, the weary science teacher, scrolled through the same video. His hazel eyes were haunted. His thinning hair fell untidily across his forehead. He knew what he had seen with his own eyes. Ranger calm, Daniels tense, the escalation unprovoked. Yet here was the evidence that would bury the truth. He rubbed his temples, the memory of his wife's fatal accident flooding back, the helplessness of being told by officials that nothing could be done. That same helplessness was here again, creeping through Maplewood's veins. Ethan's conscience screamed, but fear held him still. Meanwhile, the town's gossip brewed like storm clouds. In Maplewood's diners and church pews, voices repeated the official narrative. That dog was too big for a child. The cops wouldn't shoot without reason. The Carters brought this on themselves. Each word wrapped Olivia tighter in a shroud of suspicion, each whisper isolating her further. That night, Jack sat at the dining table with Amanda, the documents strewn across wood scarred from years of family dinners. Amanda's voice was sharp with controlled frustration. "We need more than anger. We need hard proof. The video alone damns us." Jack's face was carved from stone, his eyes burning with determination. "Then we find another angle. I won't let them twist this into Ranger's fault. They killed him in front of my daughter. They won't bury that truth." But as the hours stretched, doubt coiled tighter. Each page, each whisper, each headline seemed to build walls around them. Jack, who had once led men into impossible missions, now felt like a lone soldier with no backup, trapped in enemy terrain. The battlefield was no longer a foreign desert, but a courtroom of public opinion. And here, his weapons were useless. In her room, Olivia lay curled beneath the blanket, Ranger's collar clutched to her chest. She whispered his name into the darkness, begging him to return, to tell her she was not alone. Her grief twisted with shame. If everyone believed Ranger had been dangerous, did that mean loving him was wrong? She shook with the weight of doubt. a 12-year-old heart crushed between memory and rumor. And outside, Maplewood's streets glowed with porch lights, leaves scattering in the wind, as if the town itself exhaled secrets. Daniels and Grant, meanwhile, sat in a bar at the edge of town, smug in the safety of their report. Daniels's pale eyes narrowed with satisfaction, while Grant's heavier frame leaned comfortably, both confident the system would shield them again. Yet none of them realized that the storm Jack Carter was preparing would not be stopped by whispers or lies. The question was not whether he would strike back, but when. And then, in the early hours, Amanda's phone buzzed with a new message. She read it once, her face paling. She slid the phone across to Jack, who scanned the words quickly. His jaw tightened, his eyes lifted, cold and certain. "It's worse than we thought," he said. But before Amanda could ask, Olivia's cry echoed from upstairs, a raw sound that pierced the silence. Jack bolted from his chair, his soldier's reflexes alive. The battle for truth was only beginning, and already the web of lies was pulling tighter. The morning of the hearing dawned gray and windless over Maplewood, as though even the sky refused to take sides. Inside the small municipal courthouse, the air smelled faintly of old wood polish and paper, the kind of scent that spoke of bureaucracy more than justice. Jack Carter stood stiffly near the front, his tall, broad-shouldered figure wrapped in a plain navy suit that fit awkwardly, as if borrowed. The clean lines of his face were betrayed by dark circles under his eyes, evidence of sleepless nights pacing the floor. The soldier in him had been trained to adapt, but no combat had prepared him for this. His credibility judged not by valor, but by rumor, his daughter's future balanced on strangers' perception. Beside him, Amanda Lewis, his younger sister and attorney, spread papers across the table with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent a decade in courtrooms. At 35, Amanda's slender frame carried an aura of precision. Her long chestnut hair was pinned into a severe bun, her tailored charcoal suit immaculately pressed, and her expression composed though her brown eyes burned with restrained fury. Known in state circles as relentless, Amanda had made a career fighting civil rights cases, yet now she faced her most personal battle. Her voice had the clipped cadence of a lawyer, but Jack knew the tremor beneath it. Fear that the system would crush their family regardless of truth. On the bench a few rows behind, Olivia Carter sat with her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. She wore a modest blue dress Amanda had chosen, though it hung awkwardly on her thin shoulders. At 12, Olivia's dark eyes no longer held childhood wonder. They reflected exhaustion, the weight of whispers at school, the loneliness of being branded as the girl with the dangerous dog. She clutched Ranger's worn collar hidden in her pocket, her thumb rubbing the metal tag until her skin was raw. Every whisper in the courtroom, every glance pressed against her like a physical weight. She feared they would take her away from her father, feared being left with no one. The opposing table held City Attorney Harold Whitman, a man in his late 50s with thinning gray hair combed meticulously back, his glasses perched low on his long nose. Harold was stocky, his paunch stretching against his vest, but his voice carried an oily confidence. He was Maplewood through and through, once a small-town prosecutor who had built a career protecting local institutions rather than questioning them. Behind him sat Officer Mark Daniels and Officer Paul Grant, dressed in formal uniforms, their badges gleaming beneath the fluorescent lights. Daniels, with his square jaw and pale eyes, wore the faint smirk of a man convinced the outcome was already decided. Grant, heavier and more reserved, stared straight ahead, his expression unreadable but his shoulders relaxed, as though insulated by the system around him. The Judge Margaret Holloway, a woman in her early 60s, entered with brisk authority. Holloway had silver-streaked hair pulled into a neat twist, her robe pressed with military sharpness. Her face was angular, her lips thin, her voice clear and firm. A veteran of decades on the bench, she had seen countless hearings of misconduct and disputes, yet her reputation in Maplewood was one of caution, never leaning too far toward controversy, never shaking the confidence of the institutions she represented. Her blue eyes scanned the courtroom, pausing briefly on Olivia before shifting to the attorneys. The proceeding began with Amanda's voice strong, laying out Ranger's training as an emotional support animal for Olivia, explaining his gentle temperament, the therapy sessions that had been documented. She called witnesses who spoke of the dog's behavior, neighbors who had seen Ranger accompany Olivia on countless walks without incident. Each word was precise, measured, but Amanda could feel the tide pulling against her. Then Harold Whitman rose, his voice smooth. He presented the video clip captured by a neighbor's phone, the grainy image projected on a screen. Ranger stepped forward in front of Olivia. Daniels shouted. The gunshot followed. Played without context, the clip looked damning. Murmurs rippled through the room. Whitman emphasized the danger of a large, uncontrollable animal in the hands of a child. He gestured toward Olivia. This was a tragedy, yes, he said solemnly, but it was preventable. The officers acted in good faith to protect the community. Amanda objected, her voice sharp, pointing out the cut edges of the video, the missing frames. She argued that context was everything, that a protective stance was not an attack, but Holloway's face remained impassive. Then came the blow Jack had dreaded. Harold introduced documents from the Department of Child and Family Services, alleging concerns about Olivia's welfare. The words cut like blades. Father exhibiting signs of post-traumatic stress, environment of instability, potential endangerment. The implication was clear. Jack Carter, decorated veteran, was unfit to parent. Jack's fists clenched under the table, his knuckles pale, but he said nothing, aware any outburst would feed their narrative. Inside, his chest burned with rage. Every mission he had led, every sacrifice, and now he was painted as unstable, dangerous, unworthy of his daughter. He glanced at Olivia, who stared back with wide, terrified eyes, silently begging him not to lose control. Amanda argued fiercely, citing Jack's record, his therapy compliance, his stable home environment. But the momentum had shifted. The courtroom air grew heavy, whispers thickening like smoke. Even Olivia could sense it, justice slipping from their grasp. She felt the collar in her pocket and wished Ranger were there to shield her from the glares. When the session adjourned for recess, Amanda collapsed into her chair, her face pale. "They're building a case to separate you two," she whispered to Jack. "This isn't about the dog anymore. It's about control." Jack stared at the floor, jaw tight, his mind racing like it had on countless battlefields. But this enemy was different, invisible, bureaucratic, wrapped in the armor of legality. He had no rifle, no team at his back. He had only his word, and already they had twisted that into weakness. As they left the courtroom for a brief break, reporters crowded the steps outside. Microphones thrust forward, voices calling, "Mr. Carter, are you unstable? Did you threaten the officers? Is it true Child Services may remove your daughter?" Jack shielded Olivia with his arm, but he could not shield her from the sting of the words. Each question sank into her heart like another bullet. She lowered her gaze, clutching the collar tighter. By the time they returned inside, Amanda's phone buzzed with an alert. A video clip was circulating online, edited crudely but effectively. Jack's military service footage intercut with Ranger's fatal moment, captions reading, "Unstable vet, dangerous dog." Already it had thousands of shares. Amanda's throat tightened. "They're poisoning the jury of public opinion," she murmured. Jack read the screen, his eyes dark with controlled fury. He knew propaganda when he saw it. He had fought insurgents who wielded lies like weapons. But here, in the town he had chosen to raise his daughter, the same tactics had followed him home. The afternoon session was shorter but no less brutal. Holloway, her tone steady, announced that further investigation by Child Services was warranted. Olivia might remain with her father for now, but the agency reserved the right to review custody. The gavel fell like a hammer of fate. Olivia's breath hitched. She looked at Jack, panic rising, tears brimming. "They're going to take me away, aren't they?" she whispered. Jack knelt quickly, pressing his hands to her trembling shoulders. "No one is taking you from me," he said firmly, though the uncertainty in his chest gnawed like a wound. Amanda packed her files in silence, her lips pressed into a line so thin it nearly disappeared. Outside, the courthouse bell chimed the hour, echoing over Maplewood like a cruel reminder. And somewhere in the back of the courtroom, unseen by the Carters, a man slipped quietly out the side door, phone in hand. His call was short, his voice low. "The narrative's sticking. Public's on our side. Next step, push Child Services harder." He ended the call and melted into the Maplewood crowd. Back in the hallway, Jack tightened his arm protectively around Olivia. But inside, a terrifying thought coiled. He was losing the battle, and soon he might lose the war for his daughter altogether. The wall of justice wasn't merely closing, it was sealing them inside. For 3 nights, the wind had carried the toll of courthouse bells through Maplewood's narrow streets, and each toll seemed to weigh heavier on Ethan Moore's chest. He had told himself silence was survival, that keeping his head down was safer for everyone. But each time he closed his weary hazel eyes, he saw Olivia Carter's thin shoulders hunched in the courtroom, her hands twisting an invisible leash, her gaze hollow, as though the world had already decided she was guilty. Ethan, 45 years old, tall but slightly stooped from years bent over microscopes and lesson plans, was a man marked by grief of his own. His thinning chestnut hair and lined forehead made him look older than his years. His wife's death in a sudden car accident had carved away the carefree teacher he once was, replacing him with a cautious man who spoke softly, never pushed too hard, and carried guilt like a stone in his pocket. Yet as days passed, he knew that if he remained quiet now, he would no longer recognize himself. Ethan walked to the school that morning with a folder tucked beneath his arm, his corduroy jacket flapping in the breeze, its elbows worn thin from years of use. Inside the folder were still images he had salvaged from a security camera near the playground fence. Blurry, distant, but clear enough to show Ranger's stance before the shot. The German Shepherd had not lunged. His body was angled defensively, his tail low, his focus locked not on aggression, but on protection. Ethan had stumbled on the footage while cataloging science lab files on the school's shared drive. At first, he told himself it was nothing, but each time he looked at it, his conscience burned hotter. That afternoon, Ethan made his way to Amanda Lewis's office, the civil rights attorney whose name he had read in the papers. Amanda was brisk, her tall figure framed in the doorway of her small but tidy office, hair swept back, charcoal suit crisp despite the late hour. Her sharp brown eyes studied Ethan with suspicion until he explained who he was. He stammered at first, unused to speaking in courtly tones, but when Amanda saw the trembling folder in his hands, her skepticism softened. She invited him in, her voice clipped but steady. Amanda examined the images, her expression tight. "This could help," she admitted, tapping a manicured finger against one photo. "But you'll have to testify. Are you ready for what that means?" Ethan's throat dried. He pictured Daniels's pale blue eyes, Grant's cold stare. He thought of the police officer's unspoken threats. Yet he also saw Olivia, clutching Ranger's collar like it was the last bridge to her mother. He straightened, adjusting his glasses. "I can't keep watching her get buried under lies. I'll testify." The words had barely left his mouth when Amanda's office door opened. In stepped Detective Samuel Ortega, a man Amanda had called to vet Ethan's claim. Ortega was in his early 50s, tall and lean with dark hair gone mostly gray at the temples, his olive skin marked by a network of faint scars across his jawline. His eyes, a deep brown, were sharp, unblinking. The eyes of a man who had spent decades reading lies in interrogation rooms. Once a homicide detective in a neighboring city, Ortega had transferred to Maplewood after a shooting incident left him disillusioned with big city politics. He carried himself with deliberate calm, his gray blazer slightly rumpled, his tie loosened. Though polite, there was a heaviness to his presence, the air of someone who had seen too much, but still carried a stubborn streak of honor. Ortega listened as Amanda explained. Ethan repeated his account, his voice steadier now, and Ortega's gaze did not waver. Finally, Ortega nodded. "If you're telling the truth, Mr. Moore, then this footage is dangerous, for you as much as for them." He leaned closer, lowering his tone. "Officers like Daniels and Grant, they don't like loose ends. Be careful." That night, Ethan returned to his modest one-bedroom apartment above Maplewood's bookstore. The space smelled faintly of paper and coffee. Books lined every wall, and his desk was cluttered with science journals and lesson plans. He set his folder carefully on the desk, booted his old computer, and began preparing the files to email Amanda. As he typed, he felt lighter, as though speaking the truth had finally loosened the stone he carried in his chest. But the relief did not last. Near midnight, as rain tapped against the window, a sound broke through, the soft scrape of metal at the back door. Ethan froze. His heart pounded, every nerve suddenly awake. He stood slowly, grabbing the small lamp from his desk as if it were a weapon. The door creaked. Shadows spilled into the narrow hallway. Two figures entered, both dressed in dark hoodies, faces obscured. One was broad-shouldered, moving with the confidence of someone trained. The other shorter, quicker, scanning the apartment with ruthless efficiency. Ethan's voice cracked as he demanded, "Who are you? What do you want?" The broad one ignored him, heading straight for the desk. "No!" Ethan shouted, lunging forward. But the shorter figure shoved him hard against the wall. Pain shot through his shoulder as he collapsed. He struggled up, breath ragged, but already the taller intruder had yanked the folder open, scattering photos across the floor. The shorter one grabbed his computer tower, yanking cords free. Ethan's voice cracked again, desperate. "Those are the only copies! You don't understand! This is evidence!" The intruder didn't answer. With a swift movement, the taller one smashed the hard drive against the edge of the desk. Sparks burst, fragments scattered. Ethan staggered forward, but another shove sent him sprawling again. His glasses skittered across the floor, leaving his vision blurred. By the time he reached for the desk, the intruders were gone, vanishing into the rain-slick night, leaving only the echo of the door slamming shut. Ethan sat trembling in the wreckage, his hands cut from broken plastic, his chest heaving. He looked at the scattered photos, many torn under boots. His only proof, destroyed. Rage and despair tangled in his throat, until all he could do was whisper Olivia's name, his voice breaking. The next morning, Amanda arrived to find Ethan slumped at his desk, his eyes bloodshot, his apartment ransacked. She bent to pick up one of the ruined images, her jaw tightening. "They got to you," she muttered. Ortega, who had accompanied her, scanned the room with practiced eyes. His expression was grim. This was deliberate. They wanted the files gone, and to send a message. Amanda crouched beside Ethan. "Do you have backups? Anything?" Ethan shook his head, his voice hoarse. "That was all I had. They destroyed everything." He looked at Amanda, guilt hollowing his face. "I tried. I wanted to help her, but it's gone now." Amanda pressed his hand, her grip fierce. "It's not over. We'll find another way." Ethan lowered his gaze, tears brimming. He had finally chosen courage, but courage alone had not been enough. Outside, rain pattered against Maplewood sidewalks, washing over fallen leaves, carrying fragments of secrets down the gutters. In the courthouse square, Daniels and Grant sat in their cruiser, sipping coffee, their eyes scanning the quiet town. Grant's lips curled faintly as he read a text on his phone. "Files neutralized, no leaks." Daniels exhaled, leaning back, his smirk returning. And across town, in the Carter home, Olivia woke from another nightmare, clutching Ranger's collar. She whispered into the darkness, "Don't let them win." But her words felt thin, fragile, swallowed by the storm that raged outside, and the storm still building within. The night after the break-in, the Carter home was silent except for the steady hum of the refrigerator and the occasional groan of old wood settling in the autumn chill. Jack Carter sat alone at the kitchen table, his muscular frame bent over a shattered computer tower Ethan had delivered in desperation. Jack's face, weathered by years of Delta Force deployments, was lit only by the faint glow of a desk lamp. The clean jawline that once commanded soldiers now carried a faint stubble, his gray-flecked hair untidy from sleepless hours. His dark eyes, sharp and unwavering, scanned the twisted wires and scorched circuits. To most, it was junk. To Jack, it was a battlefield, one he refused to lose. Olivia peeked from the hallway, her small frame silhouetted against the dim light. She wore an oversized hoodie, her dark hair falling untamed around her face. Her eyes, still red from tears, fixed on her father with a mixture of fear and hope. She whispered, "Daddy, can you really bring it back?" Jack forced a reassuring smile, though his heart ached. "If there's even a spark left in here, I'll find it." His voice was steady, the same tone he once used to calm terrified soldiers before raids. By dawn, soldering iron in hand, Jack had stripped the drive bare. Years of military training and intelligence recovery surfaced. Lessons on pulling fragments from wreckage, restoring data under impossible conditions. His fingers moved with disciplined precision, connecting, rerouting, coaxing life from the burnt shell. At last, the old monitor flickered. Static crawled. Then a grainy image sharpened. Jack's chest tightened. It was there. The missing video. The footage showed Olivia standing small and defiant on the sidewalk, Ranger at her side. Daniels advanced, hand on weapon. Ranger shifted forward, body low, head angled protectively. No growl, no lunge, only loyalty. Then the shot. The truth was clear. Ranger had shielded, not attacked. Jack exhaled, his hands trembling. "They can't bury this anymore," he murmured. Later that morning, Amanda Lewis arrived, her tailored suit slightly wrinkled, dark circles under her eyes betraying nights of restless preparation. When Jack showed her the footage, Amanda's usually composed features cracked, relief and fury battling on her face. "This is it," she said, gripping his shoulder. "They tried to erase it, but you've given us the weapon they fear most, the truth." Meanwhile, Ethan Moore emerged from his apartment, shaken but resolute. He had been marked by failure after the break-in, but guilt pushed him forward. His tall, stooped figure carried exhaustion, his hazel eyes shadowed, yet determination hardened his voice when he met Amanda and Jack. "There's something else you need to know," he said. Paul Grant. Before joining the Maplewood force, he was caught in a scandal, an affair with the wife of a fellow officer. It was buried, but I knew the family. They moved away, in shame, while Grant kept his badge. If pressed, I can testify. Amanda's brows furrowed. "Character attacks can be risky, Ethan." But Ethan pressed on. "It speaks to his credibility. He's not the upright officer they paint him to be." Then Ortega arrived, his tall frame filling the doorway, his gray-streaked hair damp from rain. His scarred jaw was tight with unease. "And Daniels?" he asked. Jack's expression darkened. He hesitated before answering, his deep voice carrying the weight of memory. "Daniels was once under my command in Afghanistan. He was reckless, insubordinate. I filed the report that got him discharged. I didn't know it was him until Olivia said his name. It's personal. He's had years to wait for revenge." Amanda's lips pressed into a hard line. "So this isn't just corruption. It's vendetta." Ortega nodded gravely. "And vendettas make men dangerous. We have to move carefully." Within a week, Amanda filed a motion for retrial, citing new evidence. The courtroom was packed the day the hearing resumed. Reporters lined the steps, cameras flashing, the air charged with anticipation. Olivia clutched Amanda's hand, her face pale but her chin lifted. She wore a neat dress, her dark eyes shining with fragile bravery. Jack sat beside her, a fortress of calm, though every nerve screamed to protect his daughter. On the opposing side, Harold Whitman adjusted his glasses, irritation flickering across his lined face. Daniels and Grant sat stiffly, their uniforms immaculate, but tension clung to them like sweat. Daniels's pale eyes narrowed as he recognized Jack across the room. The faint smirk he had once worn was gone. Amanda rose first, her voice steady as she presented the restored footage. Gasps rippled through the room as the video played. Ranger's stance was unmistakable, protective, not aggressive. Olivia's small frame behind him, Daniels stepping forward, the gunshot. The lie unraveled on the screen. Whitman objected, his voice sharp, but the judge silenced him. For the first time, Judge Holloway's expression shifted. Her lips pressed thin, her gaze flicking toward Daniels with unmistakable scrutiny. Then Amanda called Ethan to the stand. His voice trembled at first, but steadied as he swore under oath. He described the footage, the threats, the night intruders destroyed his home. His hazel eyes flicked toward Olivia, who watched him with gratitude. "I stayed quiet too long," he confessed, but silence nearly buried the truth. Ranger did not attack. He saved her. Amanda followed with testimony on Daniel's past under Jack's command, carefully threading facts without straying into speculation. The implication was enough. Personal vendetta, abuse of authority. Gasps filled the chamber. Daniel's jaw clenched, his pale face flushed. He shifted in his seat, glaring at Jack with a hatred barely contained. Grant fidgeted, his hands clasped too tightly, his mask of composure slipping. The session adjourned abruptly, tension thick. Outside, clouds gathered over Maplewood, the wind scattering amber leaves across the courthouse steps. Olivia pressed close to Jack, whispering, "Daddy, are we safe now?" Jack crouched to meet her eyes. His voice was gentle but low. "The truth is out, sweetheart. But sometimes the truth makes enemies even more dangerous." And as they walked to their car, unseen from the courthouse shadows, a figure lifted a phone to his ear, his voice cold. "They're cornered. We move tonight." The morning light broke soft and amber over Maplewood, washing the courthouse steps in a glow that felt almost foreign after weeks of shadows. Jack Carter stood tall at the front of the building, his broad shoulders straightened for the first time in months, his dark eyes no longer burdened by suspicion, but glimmering with fierce pride. The lines around his jaw, carved deep by grief and battle, softened as he watched his daughter skip down the steps. For a man who had faced battlefields across the world, this victory, quiet, legal, fragile, felt like the hardest won. The verdict had been decisive. Officer Mark Daniels and Officer Paul Grant were placed in handcuffs, their badges stripped, their names read into the record for perjury and abuse of power. Daniels, once smug with pale eyes and squared jaw, looked diminished, his face blotched red, his lips curled in silent rage. Grant, heavier and tired-looking, seemed broken, his wide shoulders slumping, as though the weight of years of concealed misconduct had finally crushed him. The courtroom gasped as the gavel fell, but Jack had not cheered. He had simply exhaled, the breath of a man who had held it too long. Olivia Carter, 12 years old and too familiar with grief for her age, clutched the worn leather collar of Ranger in one hand. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks, but for the first time they were tears of relief. Her brown eyes, once dimmed, now shone bright as autumn leaves under sunlight. She turned to her father, her voice breaking with both sorrow and joy. "Daddy, he's free now. Ranger's free." Jack knelt and wrapped his arms around her, pressing his cheek against her tangled dark hair. "He always was, sweetheart. Today, everyone else finally sees it too." In the days that followed, Maplewood shifted. Reporters filled the town square, broadcasting stories not of a dangerous dog, but of corruption dismantled. Judge Margaret Holloway, her stern, silver-lined face on television, announced reforms in oversight, her voice crisp but tinged with the weight of regret. Detective Samuel Ortega, with his scarred jaw and steady eyes, walked beside Amanda Lewis as they briefed the press, ensuring no stone of misconduct was left unturned. Even Ortega's usually stoic demeanor softened when he saw Olivia clutching Ranger's collar, his voice low as he murmured, "Justice has teeth when people stand up." Amanda, Jack's younger sister, radiated quiet triumph. Her long chestnut hair flowed loose for once, her eyes tired yet glowing with satisfaction. To the world, she was the fierce civil rights attorney who dismantled a wall of lies. But to Jack, she was simply his sister, the one who had stood beside him when the system tried to take everything. She leaned close after the hearing, whispering, "You gave her back her voice, Jack. Don't ever forget that." And yet, amid relief, silence lingered in the Carter home where Ranger's bed still sat empty. Olivia would curl beside it at night, her small hands tracing the outline, whispering goodnight to a friend she could never hold again. Jack watched, helpless, aching that no verdict could fill the hole left by loyalty lost. It was Amanda who finally suggested what Olivia had been too afraid to ask. One crisp morning, she drove them to the Maplewood Animal Shelter, a modest brick building with ivy climbing the walls and the faint smell of straw and disinfectant. The shelter manager, Linda Harper, greeted them at the door. Linda was in her late 40s, a broad-shouldered woman with kind green eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Her short blonde hair framed a sun-freckled face that carried lines of both laughter and sorrow. Having worked 2 decades rescuing abandoned animals, Linda carried an aura of no-nonsense compassion. She led them through rows of kennels, her voice warm but practical. Among the barking and whimpering, one sound rose different, a playful yip. At the far end of the row sat a German shepherd pup, just 5 months old, his coat dark sable with faint streaks of silver that shimmered under the fluorescent lights. His ears were too large for his head, his paws clumsy, his eyes wide and unguarded with curiosity. He bounced forward, tail wagging furiously, then tripped over his own paws, landing in a heap that made Olivia giggle through her tears. "This little one came in 3 weeks ago," Linda explained, crouching beside the pup. "Found on the roadside, malnourished but full of spirit. We've been calling him Shadow." She scratched under his chin, and Shadow's tongue lolled out in delight. Olivia dropped to her knees, her small hands trembling as she reached out. Shadow sniffed her fingers, then licked them with a wet enthusiasm that made her gasp and laugh all at once. Her laughter, clear, light, long absent, filled the kennel. Jack felt his throat tighten. He hadn't heard that sound since before Eleanor's death, since before Ranger had been taken. "Daddy," Olivia whispered, her voice small but certain. "Can we?" Jack crouched, studying Shadow's eager face. The pup's eyes locked onto Olivia's, unafraid, trusting. For a long moment, Jack saw Ranger there, not in replacement, but in spirit, in the bond that refused to die. He placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "He's yours, sweetheart. Ours." Paperwork followed, Linda guiding them with efficient patience. When they left, Shadow bounded out into the crisp Maplewood air, his new collar jingling. Olivia clutched the leash in one hand, Jack's rough palm in the other. For the first time in months, her smile was whole. That evening, as the last leaves of autumn drifted onto Maplewood's quiet streets, Jack sat on the porch swing with Shadow curled at Olivia's feet. The horizon glowed pink and gold, a dawn painted at dusk. Olivia leaned against her father, her voice soft but filled with certainty. "Ranger would have liked him." Jack kissed the crown of her head. "Ranger would have been proud of you for finding the courage to love again." They sat in silence, watching Shadow chase his own tail clumsily in the yard. Maplewood was not healed, not entirely. But for the Carter family, hope had returned, fragile yet unshakable. And as dawn promised to rise again, so too did their belief that even from despair, joy could be born anew.